What is it that catapults a crime, or at times an event that allegedly is criminal, into a realm where it remains deeply embedded in our collective imagination many decades later? Emotion can lead to the crime of the century. One of the most perplexing crimes of the century was that of Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb.
Nathan Leopold was a wealthy young Chicago boy. He was known for superior intellect. His IQ was so far above the normal scale that it was difficult to decipher precisely what it was. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of Chicago at the young age of 18 and was even contemplating a transfer to Harvard Law School. Although he was obviously intelligent, he lacked social skills and was unattractive.
Loeb, likewise, was an intelligent young man raised in a wealthy Chicago family. He was the youngest graduate from the University of Michigan at the age of 17. Unlike his close friend Leopold, he was attractive and oftentimes described to be charming. Despite his charm and intellect, he had an obsession with crime. He read about, planned, and committed crimes. Crime became a sort of game for Loeb. He wanted to commit the perfect crime, simply to prove that it could be done. Leopold's interests were very different from Loeb. However, his love for Loeb would compel him to join in Loeb's criminal activity.
In 1924, Loeb's desire to commit the perfect crime culminated. Leopold and Loeb planned to kidnap and murder Bobby Franks and Armand Deutsch, two neighborhood boys. On May 21st, Bobby Franks was heading home from school alone, while Armand was being picked up for a dentist appointment. After being lured into Leopold and Loeb's rental car, he was unmercifully clubbed to death with a chisel. They wrapped Franks' body in a blanket and dumped him into Wolf Lake, only after burning numerous body parts with hydrochloric acid to avoid identification. Leopold and Loeb's plan was working to perfection. The police were frantically searching for Bobby Franks' murderers. But a considerable discovery was made at the crime scene. A pair of horn-rimmed glasses had been found next to Bobby Franks' body. Through a long process of deduction, the police discovered that only 3 people bought that model of eyeglasses, one of them being Leopold. The discovery of Leopold's glasses was the first distinguishable slip-up by the 2 young murderers. However, the boys remained calm and patient, and they continued thinking of ways to cover over their mistake. While trying to divert the police in the opposite direction of the real murderers, the 2 young boys got caught up in their own game. Investigators combined the discovery of the typewriter used to type the ransom note and the glasses and decided to start to question Leopold and Loeb. After strenuous questioning of the boys, Richard Loeb admitted to his crime. Soon afterward, Nathan Leopold also confessed. The Leopold and Loeb families had to find a lawyer to represent their sons. They hired Benjamin Bachrach and the highly esteemed Clarence Darrow. Clarence Darrow was the most famous lawyer of the time. The newspaper called his defense the $1 Million Defense. Though he was very old, his mind was razor sharp, and his personality endeared him to the common folk. Darrow would show his skilled tactics when he decides to have Leopold and Loeb plead guilty of their offenses. Darrow knew that a jury would be hostile to the defendants. Therefore, he chose to argue in a mitigation, which the sentence is decided on by a judge only. He realized it would be harder for one man to make a life or death decision for someone than 12 people making that same decision. The presiding judge was John R. Caverly. Darrow would use Caverly's background in an attempt to appeal to his humanity.
The Leopold and Loeb case was more of a hearing than a trial. With guilt already assumed, the fight was for taking the lives of these 2 boys. The boys pleaded guilty and did not plead insanity. However, Darrow tried to use psychiatric testimony to help the defendants. The prosecution argued that psychiatric evidence was inadmissible because the defendants did not claim insanity. The defense argued strenuously that evidence of mental disease should be considered as a mitigating factor of the sentence. The most pivotal ruling of the trial was when Judge Caverly ruled in favor of the defense, allowing psychiatric evidence to be introduced.
The state presented over 100 witnesses showing the events of the crime. The defense presented thorough psychiatric testimony describing the defendant's emotional immaturity, obsession with misdemeanors, alcohol abuse, sexual longings and insecurities, along with many other problems. Loeb's classmates and associates gave testimony to his belligerence, inappropriate laughter, lack of judgment, and childishness. Leopold's associates testified that he was self-centered and had a tendency to argue. The prosecution brought their own group of psychiatrists to testify that the boys responded normally and that there was no basis of finding mental problems.
On August 22, 1924, Clarence Darrow began his summation for the defense. Darrow said the courtroom was so jammed to suffocation with hundreds of men and women rioting in the corridors outside. Darrow added that the court was the only thing standing between the boys and the bloodthirsty mob. For more than 12 hours, Darrow reminded Judge Caverly of the defendant's youth and many other occurrences that led them to commit the crime. Not for money, not for spite, not for hate. They killed him as they might kill a spider or a fly, for the experience. They killed him because they were made that way, because somewhere in the infinite process that goes to the making up of a boy or the man, something slipped, and those unfortunate lads sit here, hated, despised, outcast, with the community shouting for their blood. Are they to blame for it? There is no man on earth who can mention any purpose for it all or any reason for it all. It is one of those things that happened, and it calls not for hate, but for kindness, for charity, for consideration.
Darrow tactically argued the savage nature of the death penalty. He directly told the judge, "Tell me that you can visit the wrath of fate, enchanted life, and eternity upon a 19-year-old boy." Darrow continued to attack the death penalty, saying that it roots back to the beast of the jungle. "If the state in which I live is not kinder, more humane, and more considerate than the mad act of these two boys, I'm sorry I have lived so long." Darrow said that a life sentence was plenty of punishment for the young boys. By the end of his appeal, Judge Caverly had tears rolling down his cheek, along with many other spectators. 2 weeks later, Caverly made his decision. He called the murder a crime of singular atrocity. He concluded that he had to consider how young the boys were and the possible benefits to criminology that might be reaped from studying the boys. Finally, the case was closed, and the boys were then sent to the Joliet Penitentiary. Richard Loeb was slashed to death with a razor in a fight with James Day, a fellow inmate. However, Leopold remained intellectually active in prison. He was released in 1958, and in an interview in 1960, he said that he was still deeply in love with the late Richard Loeb. Nathan Leopold died in 1971 and donated his body to help others. Where has this trial, this search for an understanding of the roots of crime, taken us during the past 8 decades? Well, it has marked the moral decay of youth in the Chicago area. Some historians assume that the actions of Leopold and Loeb reflected the rising rebellious attitude of Chicago youths. This rebellious attitude was especially surprising in the affluent, wealthy Chicagoland area. Even wealthy intellectual children like Leopold and Loeb looked at their parents as a threat or a hindrance to them. This rebellious attitude stretches into today's society as well. Also, the perception of the death penalty has been affected by Darrow's thorough criticism of what he called an eye for an eye penalty. This was especially true in the 1960s when the execution of the death penalty reached an all-time low. Some used Darrow's arguments against the death penalty. The death penalty is still a topic of discussion and debate, especially in this year's presidential campaign.
Academic criminologists have devoted a great deal of time, energy, and imagination to the search for a single cause of all crime, and for a particular cause of particular kinds of crimes.
In today's society, murder is commonplace. However, one murder some 80 years ago is still of interest and impact today. George Chapman, an English playwright, said very applicable words: "Blood, though it sleep a time, yet never dies."